Now the second asset is groups of people in the neighborhood who come together to do things, but they're not paid. And can you show us what the graphics department did on that? All right. Now, in the political science departments, you'll find they have a name for these groups. It's a historic name. It is associations. Groups of people who come together to do things and are not paid. And as you know, there are all kinds. Why, we wondered, are associations so significant? Why do they appear so often in these stories? And why are they the most common source for the beginning of community initiatives? And we think the reason is because they aggregate people's gifts. A hospital aggregates people's deficits. An association aggregates people's gifts. Now the third piece on the map, the second, is that there are groups of people in every neighborhood that appear in these stories, and they're paid, unlike associational people. They're paid people, and they come in three flavors that you all know. One of them is for-profit. The second is not-for-profit. And the third is government. Three kinds of institutions. So when I went over to the High-Tech Graphics Center and I said to them, we want now to have a symbol for these kinds of groups in the local neighborhood. But is there a way to have just one symbol rather than three? We want to keep this map simple. Is there something that government institutions, at the local level, the parks, libraries, schools, the businesses, the mom and pop stores or the factory or the warehouse, and the not-for-profit, the hospital, the wide things that they have in common? They said, give us a day. And so this is what they came up with. Isn't that brilliant? Who would never have thought of that? But there it is. And they're right? Whether it's a government agency, it's organized that way, or a business, it's organized that way, or a university, it's organized that way, or a not-for-profit, it's organized that way. So they said they're like triangles. All of those institutions are triangles, so let's put them on the map. There you go. So that's the third asset. The local institution. The land is an asset. The improvements are on top of it. Anything like oil that might be underneath it. So the land is the fourth asset. So can you look the change? There's the land at the bottom. And then the fifth asset is that in many of the stories, people are sharing things, trading things, bartering things, exchanging things, buying things, selling things. That in total makes up the economy, but it is all exchange. So the fifth asset is exchange. Stories that people have in the story they tell about the neighborhood. And that is an asset of great value as well. That's the map of the assets that people tell us about when they are talking about what they've done to make things better. Now, the other thing about stories is that all of the stories are about connecting assets that are not now connected. Every single story could be understood that way. And that leads to the third thing that our research indicates, and that is knowing what the assets are and knowing that their connection is what builds community is inadequate because somebody has to make that happen. And so every story we can determine what resident or group was the connector or the initiator of connections, right? And so this leads us to think that people interested in community need focus a lot of research on the connective process, whereas most things that are going on are focused on something called leadership. Not against leadership, but we think that the critical determinant of a successful neighborhood changing is people and groups who do connecting. And that a successful institutional policy to relate to those communities is how can you support the identification and mobilization and extension of people and groups who are at the business of making new connections. This is not vague, this is specific. A lady, I remember one lady was knocking on the door asking her, what are people who live here done together to make things better? And she told the girl next door and her daughter, by the end of the summer, she felt we're walking down the wrong path. We're on their way to trouble. She had to do something about that for the next summer. And so she got together with the mother of the girl next door and told her, we better figure out something for those girls to do. And they began to think of all the nice things that could be done with those girls in the next summer. And then they had thought up so many things, she said, that we couldn't supervise them all, so they knew of 6 other women who had teenage daughters on the block, and they had a potluck and invited them over and told them about their idea and some of the things they thought the girls could do. And all the other mothers agreed that this was a good idea, she said. And they spent the winter, a couple more potlucks, in thinking up all kinds of things for the girls to do. And when the next summer came, there were 8 mothers, so they only had to be responsible for the girls each day, 8 days, right? And what they did, she told me, well, I'm summarizing, she told me, they did 3 things. They took girls to places like insurance companies, government offices, a warehouse, where they would learn about what goes on in these places. She was especially impressed by what they learned at the insurance. None of the girls knew anything about insurance. They learned about insurance, but they also learned about the jobs in insurance. So that was one of the things they did. Second thing, she said, we knew there were some artistic people in the neighborhood, so we got them to spend a day with the girls, each one of them, to teach them about the kind of artistic skills they had and see if the girls were interested in that. And the third thing we had them do is each week we asked them to think of a project that would make the block better. And then they would do that. I asked for an example, and she said, do you see the flags in front of all the houses? They designed a family flag for each family and made these flags, like coats of arms, right? Each flag represents something special about them. And she said when the summer was over, she said it was much more than heading them off the wrong path. She said, in fact, what had happened was that they had learned more than they had learned the year before in school. They now knew how to work together, which is a very important thing in the future of their life. They had begun to have a new sense of culture and their relationship to culture. And they had improved the block in many ways. But she said the best thing of all was that we broke the lines. We broke the lines between the mothers, we broke the lines between the girls, we broke the lines between the mothers and the girls. She said, we're a real community now. Because breaking the lines, I think, meant we are seriously in relationship with each other in productive ways.